Hey everyone, I just finished reading Empireland, which is a Sunday Times bestseller by Sathnam Sanghera. I didn't know much about the author, but on reading the back inner sleeve, he has been shortlisted for the Costa Book Awards twice for his memoir, The Boy with the Top Knot, which I have heard of, and his novel, Marriage Material. He lives in London. So this is interesting as well. Sathnam Sanghera was born to Punjabi immigrant parents in Wolverhampton in 1976. He entered the education system unable to speak English, but went to graduate from Christ's College, Cambridge, with a first-class degree in English language and literature. That's relevant because I think writers make a great contribution, and Empireland is about British Empire. And one thing that comes through, I mean, there's lots that comes through in reading this story, this book. It's amazing. It's a 9 out of 10 straight away. Well written, incredibly informative, moving, fascinating, engaging. It's 232 pages before the bibliography starts. The bibliography is 80 pages. I don't read the bibliography. I think I read it in 3 days during a work week. So yeah, it's engaging stuff. I'll read you the back. Empireland should be on the compulsory reading list of every secondary school in the country. John Simpson says that. The British Empire ran for centuries and covered vast swathes of land. It is fundamental to understanding modern Britain, from the feeling that we can go it alone when it comes to everything from Brexit to global pandemics, to our distrust of cleverness and our own particular brand of racism. However, even among those who celebrate it, there is a peculiar desire not to look at Empire's legacy too closely. We barely learn about it at school. Our institutions shy away from the subject. In Empireland, Sathnam Sanghera argues that we must confront this shared past if we are to understand who we are as a nation. Reading that after reading the book makes a lot more sense. A scorching polemic on the afterburn of empire, says the Financial Times. A terrific and very important book, says Simon Shammer. Or is that? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. David Baddiel says, an eye-opening insight into just how hardwired the imperial and colonial history of Britain is into the way we live now. It's an amazing education. Yes, agree with all of that. I was at Waterstones on the weekend, and I started looking at the books on display on the tables, recommended reading and everything. This one I picked up because there's a review on the front by James O'Brien, whose clips I've been watching on the radio. And there have been some good ones, not on the radio, on YouTube from his LBC show. And there have been some good ones, especially in light of the idiocy we've seen, unleashed on the markets and on the nation and on people and on taxpayers by these fucking morons who are in power now. Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, who John Crace calls Kwarteng, which I think is hilarious. Anyway, getting back to the point. So James O'Brien says, as urgent as it is illuminating. It was longlisted for the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction 2021. The full title is Empireland, How Imperialism Has Shaped Modern Britain. Andrew Mark calls it excellent. Sadiq Khan says, I only wish this book had been around when I was at school. That's impressive enough, and then I opened it and it's got loads more reviews inside by people whose opinion I think is worth something. Nuanced, intelligent and entertaining. The Economist. Brilliant. William Dalrymple. Fascinating. Nihal Athanayake. A masterpiece. Peter Frankopan. Brilliant. Mira Sial. Brilliant. Amelia Gentleman. Brilliant. Kathleen Moran. Excellent. Samira Ahmed. Saeed Awasi, MP, says, exactly the book cabinet ministers should be reading in these times. Hugh Laurie says, may I humbly commend Empireland. Dom Jolly says, an eye-opening, really important book. Diane Abbott said, the best book on the British Empire for a very long time. Andrew Marr says, a brilliant book. You'd have to be as dim as a medieval hovel in February to actually read it and not agree. And Jonathan Coe says, lucid but never simplistic, entertaining but never frivolous, intensely readable, definitely, while always mindful of nuance and complexity. Empireland takes a perfectly judged approach to its contentious but necessary subject. Oh my god, there's more, which I haven't ever seen before. Krishnan Guru Murphy, newsreader from the 90s, I think. A really interesting book, a really interesting look at the history of empire, everything we're not taught at school, and how learning that history could change the way we view our country today. Gideon Rackman from the Financial Times says, my book of the year so far, blimey, a really thoughtful, deeply researched and elegantly written look at the legacy of empire. Adam Rutherford said, thoughtful, witty, optimistic and scholarly. David Lammy says, a wonderful, wonderful book. And Chris Patton says, very well written, decent, balanced and wise. And then there's even more commendations, which I'm not going to read because that's a fair amount. I mean, it's a brilliant book. And there's so many things you can take away from it, such as how long the British Empire was in terms of its 500 years. And because of that, there's no distinct end to it. Lots of people disagree about when it started and when it ended. Some people say the Suez Canal disaster for Britain, where somebody commented that Britain is really no longer a superpower at all. That was back in the 70s, I think. It was a long time ago. And it's very difficult to pinpoint the end of the British Empire. Let's put it like that. Some of the things that came through, I mean, some of the cruelties of these slave owners. A big part of the end of the book is how Britain seems to try to brush over the fact that we ever had slaves. There was lots of black slavery in Britain. And there was a pulling down of the statue of Colston in Bristol. Colston became very, 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 very wealthy as a result of owning slaves. In 2015, the UK finished repatriations to do with slavery. But guess what? It wasn't, and this is really fucked up. It wasn't the descendants of the slaves who actually got the compensation for the slave trade. It was the slave owners. The slave owners got paid millions and millions and millions to compensate for them losing property after abolition. The slaves were property, let's not forget, yeah? I mean, that's crazy, that's fucked up, yeah? And then some of the stories of the slave owners, and these are only ones I remember because they're towards the end of the book. There were lots of them. There was a guy, Cornelius Hodges, in the Gambia, who had an African wife, but when she gave birth to an African baby, obviously he took the baby, crushed it in a mortar and fed it to dogs. Yeah. Then there was another guy, Thomas Thistlewood, I think, who kept detailed accounts of what he did. And for slaves who he didn't like, I don't think he liked any of them, he seemed completely fucking sociopathic. He'd make a good conservative, actually. He'd basically make one slave, punishment, he'd get one slave to shit in the mouth of another and then gag the slave with the shit in his mouth. Or piss in their mouths and their eyes. And he did this to men and women. He went around openly in public, just raping whoever he wanted. In his diary, he kept accounts. He averaged over his 37 years there, 108 sexual partners a year, and something like having sex 1,000 times. Yeah, I mean, this is fucked up, right? That was also a section on cognitive dissonance about how in British institutions we like to think, oh, the empire was all good and we never did anything bad. And there are people like, of course, this arsehole's going to come up, isn't he? There are people like Boris Johnson saying, oh, Africa's only problem is that we don't rule it anymore. Some words to that effect, which shouldn't be surprising because this is the guy who refers to Africans as pickaninnies with watermelon smiles and Muslim women as post boxes. How the fuck did this guy get to run a country? Mind-blowing. And then there's somebody even more incompetent than him in charge now. Oh my god. Anyway, but there's actually towards the end of this book where Sathnam Sanghera is talking about how we need to be aware that we're involved in the slave trade. It should be part of the education. He talks about his stellar education. I mean, he went to Cambridge and everything and studied literature and language, and only right at the end of his studies at Cambridge did he come across any non-white authors. Right, so there is a huge prejudice there. The other one, no, there's so much to mention. One of the other things is how long there have been African people in African and Asian and people from colonies basically in the UK. But we never read about it, we never hear about it. It's as if we only started getting immigration in the 70s and all of our problems are caused by immigrants, which is something that the author says if we had sensible politicians, but we don't at the moment, the politicians we have at the moment are simply interested in sowing discord. Just getting a call. I'm doing this on my phone. Okay, now we can continue. Simply interested in sowing discord. What they want is political power at the expense of all else. They're not interested in anything to do with the country. This is Sathnam's view, which actually I agree with. But look, it's a really amazing book. Towards the end of it, he says countries like us, like Germany, have faced up to their past, and they had an empire as well. It's not just the Holocaust, they had an empire as well. And maybe the UK should do the same. Some interesting things that come from. There's so much information in this book. It's almost like I'm giving little bits of unrelated stuff, but it's all unrelated. I mean, this is definitely a book that I'll read again, maybe once or twice, just to let it all sink in. Maybe I read it, so fast, but it's such a good book that you want to read it fast. It's incredible. Easily, I'll give it 10 out of 10. You can't never give anything top marks. I'll give it 10 out of 10. It's brilliant. I thoroughly recommend it. I could talk about it for ages. I really could. I've already done 11 minutes, haven't I? But here we go. Buy the book, read the book, borrow the book. It's really, really good. Empireland by Sathnam Sanghera. Who should read it? Just about everybody. I mean, if you live in the UK, read this book. You won't like it. A lot of people won't like it. But it's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. The word shampoo comes from champi, which is the Hindu word for massage, because of a guy, Said Mohammed, or Mohammed Said, who lived in the 1600s, I believe, in the UK, opened the first Indian restaurant, which did really well, but somehow he ended up bankrupt. What else happened? So then he went to set up this shampooing place. Shampoo comes from champi because he'd shampoo the people there. Kings went there and everyone knew it was the idea of your cure-all medical treatment back then. But pioneers like this. Another thing that's brought up in here, which I know there are lots of other books about, is I think there were the wars that Britain won were won mainly on the backs of brown people and black people. There weren't that many white soldiers, which makes sense because Britain's a small country that ruled over 300 million people, so there's never going to be that many white people. Another case in Burma of a guy, and this was pretty much normal treatment for people working for the East India Company, which has now been resurrected as a fucking clothing company by an Indian, no less, right? Do you know what the East India Company did to India? I say this to the person who calls his business that, but maybe he doesn't care. Maybe it's just to make money. Yeah, somebody who worked for the East. No, this was in Burma, so it can't have been. But what the East India Company did to people, oh my goodness. So this guy basically, after raping a woman, murders her husband, cuts his head off, makes her wear it around her neck, and then carries her back to his hut for more raping, basically, which was normal treatment. Were the people themselves sick, nasty, perverted, evil individuals? Not necessarily. It's part of I guess, a zeitgeist, a groupthink. Where was every single Nazi a terribly evil person? Or were they just going along with what was the normal standard of behaviour? Same as you get violent people. If you're raised in a violent household, you'll become a violent person. Is that your situation that made you evil? Is it your actual core personality that made you evil? When a child grows up or a person is surrounded by what they consider normal behaviour, you look at, there's so many examples. I'm not going to try and give more examples because this is turning into a long book review. Another interesting thing I heard from here was how the Brits basically eliminated an entire race, Tasmanian Aborigines. So some shocking stuff. Really fascinating reading. And I'll probably paint a bit of a black and white picture about, oh, it's all evil. It's a lot more nuanced than that. But what sticks in your head is just the brutality of the whole fucking thing. Lots of swearing on this. I better stop now. Empireland, Sathnam Sanghera, absolutely brilliant. 10 out of 10. Read it.